Modern national security relies heavily on massive, centralized networks. But when a single macro shock hits the core, the system shatters, severing power to the periphery. The New World Order is a period dominated by polycrises, simultaneous, overlapping events like geopolitical multipolarity, climate change, and economic volatility occurring at the exact same time. These intersecting shocks create severe bottlenecks in the precise global supply chains, energy grids, and food networks we depend on daily. Traditional defense models assume the state will protect its citizens from the top down. However, this centralized approach is structurally vulnerable to these exact types of systemic bottlenecks. Global public health data and major policy frameworks dictate a forced pivot away from state-level defense, moving instead toward a concept known as societal resilience. Societal resilience measures the capacity of local populations to absorb and adapt to global-scale infrastructure failures entirely on their own. The primary mechanism to achieve this local independence is a community-based, holistic well-being system. This approach targets 4 interlocking dimensions: physical health, mental stability, social cohesion, and ecological balance. In a multipolar world facing complex threats, true stability cannot be mandated from the top down. It must be engineered from the bottom up. This flowchart illustrates how systemic collapse actually occurs. A single geopolitical conflict bypasses traditional military defenses, striking civilian infrastructure directly. The primary driver of civilian mortality isn't direct combat, but the indirect cascading failure across 5 specific vectors: health, food, economy, social, and environment. The first vector is health system collapse. Looking at the conflict in Sudan, over 70% of hospitals in conflict zones shut down, physically eliminating the formal healthcare capacity for the population. The immediate, indirect consequence of losing these hospitals is the unchecked outbreak of infectious diseases, leading to severe surges in cholera and malaria. The second vector is food system disruption. By severing transport routes and collapsing local markets, conflict drove 139 million people into acute food crisis in 2021. This lack of food translates directly to severe pediatric health emergencies. The third vector is economic livelihood loss. Without stable food or health systems, households resort to negative survival strategies, drastically reducing their nutrition or selling off essential assets. These desperate economic decisions strip away wealth-generating tools, locking entire populations into unbreakable poverty cycles long after a conflict ends. The fourth vector is social fragmentation. In Ethiopia, the destruction of agriculture and basic infrastructure forced the massive displacement of over 5.5 million people, completely dissolving established communities. The final vector is environmental damage. Warfare releases immense air, water, and soil pollution, creating planetary health crises that prevent future agricultural recovery. Climate modeling indicates atmospheric soot from a nuclear conflict would create a nuclear winter, blocking sunlight and reducing global food yields by up to 80%. Centralized national governments simply lack the structural bandwidth to isolate and patch these 5 simultaneous system failures during a macro crisis. Major global institutions recognize this architectural flaw and are actively shifting their developmental frameworks toward building local capacity. The United Nations has introduced the Resilience Guidance Framework, replacing top-down directives with a new blueprint for risk-informed development. The UN Development Program now states that community-level resilience is a strict, non-negotiable prerequisite for surviving overlapping crises like pandemics and climate change. This matrix maps UN Sustainable Development Goals to local capacities. SDG 3, Good Health, relies on decentralized community support. SDG 11, Sustainable Cities, requires self-organizing neighborhoods. And SDG 13, Climate Action, demands local disaster adaptation, handling extreme weather without federal aid. Achieving any of these global survival metrics requires engineering resilience at the neighborhood level first. How exactly does an isolated community construct a functional shield against a global supply chain failure? This diagram illustrates community-based holistic well-being. 5 interlocking pillars form a protective barrier. Food sovereignty isolates via local agriculture. Health system resilience creates redundant local clinics. Energy resilience decouples from national grids. Social capital pools resources. Psychological resilience manages collective stress, preventing panic. In practice, Pillar 1 manifests as physical infrastructure. Community gardens provide a baseline calorie supply, proving that local food sovereignty is highly actionable. Pillar 2 operates through decentralized triage. When formal hospitals close, trained community health workers step in as the immediate first line of medical defense. Data shows Pillar 4, social capital, is the highest predictor of rapid crisis recovery. Trust translates to logistical survival, allowing groups to efficiently distribute emergency rations. Communities equipped with these 5 pillars develop core adaptive traits. They can anticipate incoming threats, self-organize their logistics, and transform their local economies under pressure. These pillars turn a local population from a passive victim awaiting state aid into an active, localized firebreak against global shocks. When resilient communities connect, they form a robust grid. As an exogenous shockwave hits, these independent nodes absorb the impact and keep the lights on. The core academic insight here is that community well-being and systemic resilience are not separate disciplines. They are tightly coupled survival mechanisms. A local economy equipped with high social capital and environmental balance creates a mathematical buffer. It isolates the population from multipolar volatility. Community planning must evolve past the goal of basic survival. The objective is to design a regenerative community, one that continuously heals, adapts, and grows. This architecture can be built immediately. Citizens and local leaders can take specific actions within the next 7 days. These hyper-local tactics include planting gardens for food-sharing networks, establishing local health volunteers, and setting up crisis communication channels. Systematically reducing reliance on complex, fragile global supply chains is the ultimate defensive strategy. In this multipolar environment, global security is no longer granted by the state. It is built, sustained, and defended entirely from the bottom up.